It's Christmas Eve. The air is filled with holiday warmth as you put the final touches on the decorations. And just as you step back to admire your work, your phone rings. It's your son-in-law. Is she with you? He asks. And you pause confused because no. Why would she be? You glance around, suddenly realizing something unsettling. You haven't spoken to your daughter all day. She's missing. The room feels colder as his words sink in. Your heart races, disbelief flooding your mind. And then echoing through time and space, you ask, what do you mean, missing? Hello, everyone, and welcome to That's My Opinion. My name is Bacon Bears, and today we are discussing the devastating case of Laci Peterson. I recently covered Scott Peterson's retelling of his version of the story while maintaining his innocence in the documentary Face to Face with Scott Peterson, which is the first time that he's been interviewed in 20 years. And I wanted to complement that with Laci's story. I wanted to tell hers secondary for two reasons. Number one, I wanted to go into Scott's as objective as possible. I personally think he's guilty and he had everything to do with this. But also I wanted Laci's to go second because I wanted Laci's story, the victim's story, to be the lasting memory on everybody's mind. In 2004, Scott Peterson was sentenced to death and convicted of murdering Laci, his wife, and their unborn son, Connor. And later that sentence was overturned and the death penalty was taken off and he was sentenced to life in prison without parole. The episode opens up with a man talking to a woman, and it's Scott and Laci's mother, and you can hear the franticness just in her voice. And they really delve into the magnitude of this case, which captured national and worldwide attention. Laci Peterson became a household name. I was 16 and I remember this vividly. There are some things that really stick in my brain when you talk about Laci Peterson, and the picture of her in her wedding dress is one of them. And the second thing that's come straight to my brain when you think about, or when I think about her, or when you say her name, is her smile. She had this incredibly just warm, just amazing smile. The first interview is with Sharon Roca, Laci's mom, and when I tell you I wasn't ready for the emotion, I immediately got goosebumps. And mother to mother, I can't imagine what she still feels now. She says, nothing can change the truth. At 5:17 p.m., Scott calls Sharon asking if Laci was there, and when she responds no, he says, well, then she's missing. And that immediately raises a red flag for me, because couldn't there be any other explanation before we go to something that is so tragic? Couldn't she be just out and about? Wouldn't you call friends, maybe other places, to see if she's there? Wouldn't you go to see if she's somewhere? To see, like, why was that the first she's missing? Sharon urges Scott to call Laci's friends to see if they've seen her, which leads to a frantic situation. Ron, her stepdad, then calls the police, and the first thing that stands out in his comment during the 911 call is, my son-in-law was golfing this morning, and my daughter is missing. In hindsight, we know now that Scott was, in fact, not golfing, nor was he fishing. He was at the Berkeley Marina, however, 90 miles away from home, with a fishing license that he had purchased December 20th on the boat that he had that nobody knew about, that he purchased on December 9th, with a fishing license for only December 23rd and December 24th. I'm so glad that the police and the family took this seriously right away. Scott claimed that Laci was out walking the dog, so Sharon immediately went to the park that was right down the street from their house. Sharon tells Scott to meet her in the park, and meanwhile, 3 of Laci's best friends are already out there. They're making flyers, they're contacting the media, they're talking to the police. They went and got their most recent photo from their Christmas party that they just had. I mean, they were like, work, 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 work. Scott then reaches out to the neighbors and they decide to come and help. And by the time they get there, it's packed. Friends, family, neighbors, strangers, police, everybody is out looking for Laci. The one thing that stands out in this documentary is the immense emotion that these people show even today. Still getting choked up when they tell the retelling of the story, still tears, still taking moments and breaths. And meanwhile, Scott Peterson in 2002 and in 2024 still shows little to no emotion. At 9:55 p.m., Detective Al Brocchini is called to the scene, and he meets Scott for the very first time. And Scott is calm, polite, and shows no urgency. They immediately search the house, where Laci's purse and wallet are still there. But it's Scott's truck that raises a flag for the detective. In the back is a large tarp, and inside it are several patio umbrellas, like the ones that like stick in the middle of a table. Scott quickly explains that he was at the marina fishing using a silver lure, a lure that was found in its packaging. Still. And when they ask to search Scott's shop, he agrees, and they don't find anything that seems suspicious. Al Brocchini comes on, and during his interview, he just says, "I'm still trying to prove that Scott has nothing to do with this." Actually, one of the other detectives comes on and says that Detective Al Brocchini's job specifically was to clear Scott, which I did not know that they had like one person specifically doing that. Very interesting. Detective Al Brocchini says that he must eliminate Scott as a suspect, which, of course, you always have to eliminate the people who are closest to you, the ones who saw you last, the places that you've been to. And the interview with Scott at the police station reveals him as very calm and collected with no urgency or visible concern. Scott claims that he initially planned to go golfing, but decided that he would fish instead. But my question is, if it was too cold to golf, wouldn't it also be too cold for fishing? But notably, he purchased his fishing license just days prior. 4 days prior, actually. He picked up his boat that he bought on December 9th, a detail nobody knew about, and drove almost 90 miles away to launch it when there are numerous locations closer to home. And it's strange that on Christmas Eve, you would leave your pregnant wife at home to drive hours away to put your boat in water for the very first time. At 2:15 p.m., he leaves a voicemail for Laci while still at the marina, and when he gets home, he finds that the door is unlocked and the dog is in the yard with the leash on, which he said drew cause for concern. But he wasn't that concerned. He then decided to wash his own clothes, take a shower, have pizza, have milk, and then he called Sharon Roca. Why didn't he call her cell phone? Why didn't he go to look for her? He claims that he spoke to Sharon and visited neighbors, but one neighbor reported Scott saying that he was golfing that morning. So that's now two people. That's Ron on the 911 phone call, and that is the neighbor. Scott has now changed his stories. And the discrepancy in his story really raises questions about his credibility. When Laci's parents arrive, Scott talks about fishing. And they're like, "Fishing? You said you went golfing. Also, where did you get a boat?" Like, they had no idea that Scott owned a boat. And his sister-in-law, who is also in the docuseries that he did on Peacock, expresses that Scott seemed frantic on the phone, but the night before, there was no sign of panic. So the night that he claims that Laci went missing, he is calm, cool, collected, no big deal. And then the next day with his own family, he just was a total mess. As the documentary unfolds, we see Laci's backstory. She was an excited college student who had a vibrant personality. And when she met Scott, she was young and in love. Friends describe him as very showy, the kind of guy who would go over the top with dinners and flowers, and he would take her on trips. And love bombing in a way. And one of the girls even brings it up and says, "I don't think we called it love bombing at the time, but that's what it would be considered now." Scott's family adored Laci, and Laci's family, adored Scott. And their wedding photos captured a radiant Laci seemingly at the happiest moment of her life. She does just exude such a bright spirit. On Christmas Day, interest in this case explodes. A pregnant woman missing during the holidays. Scott and Laci are both good looking. They drew media attention. They show footage of Laci as like a baby and a teen, and I was just smiling. Like watching all this footage. They're like making up their own commercials and like dancing and doing like cheer routines. It was so cute. It was like, it reminded me of everything that I did as a teenager, just like stupid girl sleepover stuff. I felt like in this documentary, aside from everything that's going on, like you really get a good idea of who Laci was as a person. The day after Christmas, her family and friends set up a command center. I mean, they were organized. They set up a command center in a hotel, I believe, reaching out for help while neighbors and strangers joined the search. Like they were making ribbons, they were making flyers, they were making phone calls, they were taking phone calls, like just they were going to find Laci. Heather, who is a friend of Laci's, says that now, looking back on it at the time, Scott would joke and laugh during this grim time, which I can't say much about that because I laugh at the oddest times, like, because it helps me get rid of the nervous energy. She says now, looking back on it and knowing what they know now, it seems odd considering the circumstances. In a press release, Scott's sister speaks on behalf of both families, standing united, believing that he had nothing to do with Laci's disappearance. And the media came after Scott right away. The police chief faces reporters' questions about Scott's fishing, and boy, was that uncomfortable to watch. You're just watching reporters like ask and ask and ask about Scott. And the poor police chief is up there and he's like, I can't talk about that. I can't talk about that. We're not talking about this. We can't talk about. But then after the media is all asking about Scott and the police chief has reiterated that they have not named Scott as a suspect. They do not have a suspect yet. Scott leaves the press conference. Bye. And that rightfully so raises eyebrows. Wouldn't you comfort your mother-in-law or your sisters or her family member? Like anybody? Wouldn't you comfort anybody? I have to say, if I'm standing in a press conference and people are like, where were you? What were you doing? I'd be like, I had nothing to do with this. Go find my wife. Or in my case, my husband. Scott doesn't want anything to do with the media. Nothing, which is baffling for someone who is so close to the missing person. Don't you want to do interviews? Don't you want to tell them about her? Her friends say that Scott advised them to keep the focus solely on Laci. Don't show my face. We don't need to be shown together, just Laci. Don't put me in the media. Don't put my pictures. Just Laci, which in hindsight is suspicious, but I have my theories. On Christmas Eve, Scott agreed to a polygraph test, but his father advised against it, leading him to decline, in fact, the next morning. Sharon Roca describes trying to speak with Scott, but he was evasive. Sharon goes on to tell this story about how every time she would try to talk to Scott, like he was always busy or he was just very evasive, like he could never be around her. And she said that she came up behind him and grabbed his shirt and pulled him into a room and was like, you need to tell me what happened. And she said he didn't say much. And when she asked him about the boat, he said that it was a surprise for Ron for family bonding, but he didn't have much further to say after that. When Sharon asked Scott, why didn't you take a polygraph test? He said that he was simply too upset. I'm too upset to take it. Didn't you say that your dad told you not to take it? Sharon then goes on in her interview to express her love for Scott and tried to understand his hesitance, but she couldn't shake the feeling a mother just knows. Everyone talked about how Scott and Laci were the perfect couple, but Laci confided in her mother about wanting to have children when Scott initially didn't. Laci calls Sharon, sobbing on the phone, and tells her Scott doesn't want to have kids. And Laci absolutely wanted to be a mother. 6 months later, Laci calls her mom again and tells her that they were trying because Scott had just changed his mind. They show some journal entries from Laci, and Laci's like documenting her pregnancy and her feelings. And she says that she could feel the baby kick, and then Scott got an opportunity to feel the baby kick, and she was so excited to share that moment with him. And he just didn't seem excited at all. And she was like, I know he's excited. He didn't show the same enthusiasm towards her pregnancy. Sharon said that she felt a sense of uneasiness about Scott's sudden change of heart regarding fatherhood, because that is a big deal. That's also something that you should discuss before marriage. Why didn't you tell Laci before you got married that you didn't want to have kids? Except you just drop that bomb on her then, and then just be like, oh, never mind. I guess I'll just make this life-changing decision. Because the sister goes on to talk about a time that they were at Scott's house and the police come. And they have a consent form, and they're like, hey, we need to search the house again. We need to search the warehouse and, the boat and all your stuff. And you just sign the consent form, and we just do that, and it's no big deal. And Scott looks at them and he goes, you don't expect me to do this without a lawyer, do you? To which, why? Don't you want the police to come in and try to find your loved ones? Which it didn't matter because they had a search warrant anyways. So they presented him with the search warrant, and then they go on to search everything. So when the police come into the house with the search warrant, they have a videotape, and they're, just videotaping walking through the home and walking through the yard and the garage. And the one thing that I noticed is that Mackenzie, the dog, is barking at them. They tell the dog to be quiet quite a few times, which I find extremely interesting because according to Scott's documentary, Laci confronted the burglars in this burglary that was across the street. And if she did that while she had the dog, this is not a dog that I saw in the videotape that would not give a stranger grief if they tried to harm its owner. They find that nothing was in the house. There's no forced entry. There's no crime scene. There's no blood. There's no sign of a struggle. No doors were broken, no windows were broken, there's nothing at the house. They searched his warehouse, and a detective noted a homemade anchor that Scott had made, and it was in the boat. And it's this cylinder shape, and it's concrete, and it has like rod iron so you could like pick it up or tie it to something. And it appeared that he had made multiple anchors, and when they went to look at the counter, it seemed that there was like concrete dust on the counter, but there were circular shapes that were not covered by the dust, which would have told you that there was some sort of can to make the shape of the concrete. And there were 5 anchors on that counter, but there was only one in the boat. And notably, there was no rope in the boat. You have an anchor in the boat, you have fishing poles, you have fishing lures that you didn't open, but you have no rope. So how is it that you are going to secure the anchor to the boat? Detectives are also at this time alerted to a burglary across the street, prompting them to investigate if it is connected to Laci's case. The Modesto Police Department received over 11,000 tips. Can you even imagine? They created a call center dedicated solely to tracking leads because, wow. And there is a woman typing a tip, and on the screen, she writes, woman on phone states that Scott Peterson is her boyfriend. And Al Brocchini happens to be walking by, and he sees this on the screen, and he goes, give me that phone right now. And he picks it up, and it is Amber Fry, which shifts the entire narrative of this case. The episode ends with Scott and Amber on the phone, where he expresses his desire to be with her forever. And as I reflect on this episode, I do find parallels to Scott's own documentary. I do maintain my belief that Scott Peterson is absolutely guilty of these crimes, but this documentary and his documentary challenges me to consider whether there was enough concrete evidence for the death sentence. That is my biggest thing. Even if Scott did it, and I do think he is guilty, was there enough evidence to sentence him to death? And I look forward to seeing how this unfolds. Let me know your thoughts and comments in the comment box down below, and stay tuned for the next episode covering the second installment of this docuseries. My name is Bacon Bears, and I'll see you next time.